active June as three systems have formed. We're monitoring all three of them in your hurricane headquarters, including one system that is teetering on the edge of becoming Tropical Storm Bonnie. The latest models, a Meteorologist Q&A coming your way here on Tracking the Tropics, powered by Handyman Roofing. Hello there to you. Happy Wednesday, folks. JB here with you in your hurricane headquarters, alongside, of course, Tracking the Tropics meteorologist Rebecca Barry on the right, and our featured meteorologist today, joining us from Amarillo, Texas, KMAR Chief Meteorologist John Harris. We'll be hearing from John in just a moment. You can use any of the hashtags on your screen. We'll be featuring your comments coming up in our Meteorologist Q&A out of the Facebook Live comment section, so use those hashtags. We're going to get to your questions and your comments here momentarily. We begin with hashtag Hey Jeff, hashtag Hey Jeff for Chief Meteorologist Jeff Biridelli, joining us at the wall for the very latest on these three systems, including that one that's right behind you there, Jeff, that we're keeping a very close eye on, especially for our folks in Central America. Yeah,
it's a potential tropical cyclone number 2. Once again, it's holding on to that potential tropical cyclone designation for a long time, just like Alex did, if you remember, just a few weeks back. Took a while to transition to a tropical storm. This one's taking a while as well. It is located so close to South America right now, and the reason it's not yet a tropical storm is because it doesn't have an organized center of circulation quite yet. So we have a lot of thunderstorms, a lot of convection, but it really doesn't have that closed circulation quite yet. And it's located right along the coast of South America. It's so rare that we have systems that form this far south. This one looks like it probably will. National Hurricane Center says it could happen during the day today. And so they've sent a hurricane hunter in to analyze the system, and it's still making its way through. So we'll see what happens. If it finds a closed circulation, we'll have a tropical storm by the 5 o'clock hour, and at that point it will become Tropical Storm Bonnie probably, but we'll see what happens. It could still take another day for it to happen. One of the reasons is when systems are that far south, it's hard for them to gain spin. They have to go a little further north to really start gaining spin, and right now it's just struggling and having a hard time. But of course it certainly could happen. It's at around 10 north latitude. That's how far south it is right now. We'll zoom in a little bit closer and give you kind of a view of what it looks like on the satellite. And as you can see, the thunderstorms are all kind of strung out. This is an elongated system, and again, it lacks that low-level circulation. But we do expect it will become a tropical storm, and there is still some chance it could become a hurricane, although the National Hurricane Center no longer making it a hurricane. If you were watching this yesterday, they were making it a Cat 1 off the coast of Nicaragua before it went on shore. Right now, they're keeping it a tropical storm. And you know what? I want to bring John in from our Amarillo station. I think this is so interesting. I can't remember the last time I saw a storm stay intact and just head right into the Pacific Ocean. It just goes right over that little, fairly narrow piece of land over Nicaragua and Costa Rica, and then heads right back into the Pacific Ocean.
Absolutely. And, for our part of the world up here, we are looking at the possibility of just hot weather continuing for the time being. But if that system does make it into the Pacific Ocean and were to make its way up toward the Baja of California, it actually helps to give us our best chances for rain, tropical-wise, up here in the Texas Panhandle. Believe it or not, when we have land-based Gulf systems coming in from the Gulf of Mexico, a lot of times they track back to the east away from the Texas Panhandle, and we kind of get that venting, basically a downslope or a compressional warming here. It's just sticky and hot up here in the Texas Panhandle. But for the systems moving into the Pacific Ocean, the tropical storms or hurricanes, if they can make their way up through the Baja, then they are trapped in the jet stream, pulling to the westerlies and over the Texas Panhandle. And quite often we can get some good rain that way. But again, every once in a while you do see a tropical system that changes oceans, so to speak, and makes its way from the Atlantic to the Pacific or vice versa. So only time will tell.
And it's going to get a new name if it does that, obviously. So we'll see what happens with that. I just want to ask you one other question. Last year, the monsoon in New Mexico was a very good one, right, as opposed to years before that. So did you get any help from that? Because I just want to say to the folks who are watching, John and I were talking, it has been a tough several years in Western Texas. You guys are really hurting for rainfall. So you can see there's a lot of rain on the brain right now.
That's exactly right. And when you think about geographically where Amarillo is located, say, versus Houston,
I'm going to point to it.
In the same state.
It's right up there underneath the banner. Yeah.
Underneath the banner. Yeah. We're at 3,600 feet above sea level. We're actually up here on what's known as a cap rock. And so if you're at Houston looking at Amarillo, it would look like we're up on a mountain because we're so much higher up. than the folks downstate from us. So for us to get our moisture up here in this sub-desert climate, the steppe climate, if you will, we do depend on that monsoon coming in from the mountains of New Mexico and Colorado. And every once in a while, as that ridge translates a little farther east of us, that monsoon will track right over the panhandles. So that is really our main source of moisture as we make our way through the summer months. Unless that ridge were to sit up farther west of us, then we get what's known as northwest flow. Thunderstorms develop over the mountains during the day, cruise in over the Texas panhandle during the evening and overnight hours. And that's it for our source of moisture. But believe it or not, the months of June, July, August, and September are the wet season for the Texas panhandle. And we should be around 10 inches of rain right now. And we're only at about 3.5 inches. Right. So we are still in a drought up here, varying degrees of drought across West Texas and the Texas panhandle.
And that's on top of several years of really tough conditions for you
Absolutely,
guys.
Yeah, compounds. And so all of our producers up here, we produce a lot of wheat, a lot of corn, a lot of maize, cotton, and everybody's hurting. We have a water source underneath us called the Ogallala Aquifer, and it's about 500 to 900 feet below the surface. And so these producers are having to dig new wells to reach that water table because it keeps dropping, because we can't replenish it because we're not getting the rain. It's just one thing after another.
Yeah, maybe we can come back to this towards the end of this because I have a lot of interest in that myself. All right, so let's get back to what's going on in the tropics right now. And you can see the spaghetti plots all pushing the storm exactly where the National Hurricane Center is saying it is going to go as well. Two other areas that we're watching right now, one of them in the western Gulf of Mexico. This has a chance of developing, a 40% chance of developing. It's been sitting there for a while, and it's been very, very disorganized. But the longer it sits there, the longer it has a chance to kind of organize and push some thunderstorms around the center and maybe become a tropical depression or tropical storm. So there is some chance that that may happen. It's not going to affect us here in the Tampa Bay area, but it is likely to bring at least a little bit of rain to Texas. So, of course, hopefully it'll reach a little further north. And I think you know the answer as to whether or not it's going to reach it. We'll bring you back in on that in a few seconds. Also, right behind a potential tropical cyclone number 2 is another disturbance located here in the intertropical convergence zone. This has a 30% chance of development, so it could develop, but once it gets close enough to this storm and into the northeastern Caribbean, this storm is actually going to produce extra wind shear. So this is going to be running into not just wind shear from that, just environmental wind shear. Either way, it's likely to get torn apart, even if it does, in fact, develop. So let's talk about what else we have. So this system actually is decently moist for this time of year. We would typically have a lot of dry air, but this system's protected. So we're not worried about dry air getting into the system. The dry air is way to the north near San Juan. So dry air is certainly not inhibiting this. If anything, it's just strong trade winds that are inhibiting this. System's moving at a different pace in the middle levels than it is at the low levels, and so it's having a hard time kind of aligning its center, and that's one reason. In terms of Saharan dust, because Rebecca Berry tells me that our viewers here on Tracking the Tropics love to see the Saharan dust, so let me show you what's going on Saharan dust-wise across the Atlantic. I'll step out of the picture for you. This is the Saharan dust time of year, and we do have some streaming across the Atlantic right now. But that is not necessarily the reason why we're not going to see much development after these systems, by the way. Notice that this time of year, so the end of June and July, most systems form in the Gulf of Mexico. You can see them all there. There are a few that form out here in the intertropical convergence zone and then move into the Caribbean, and so that's what's happening now. Okay, this is the 2-week outlook. So this is what we expect over the next 2 weeks. So as we head towards the beginning of July, we're going to have this large area of sinking air across the United States, across South America, and across the Atlantic Ocean. And that is likely not to allow much convection to fire up and is likely to stop any decent formation. Doesn't mean we can't see anything in this 2-week period, but if you're under this climatological sinking air and these cells of sinking and rising air kind of gradually make their way across the Pacific and the Atlantic, and you'll notice that even through the middle of July, the sinking air is still on top of the Atlantic. Oh, and by the way, it's on top of Africa too, which means it's tougher to get these seedlings to come off Africa. So it looks like it's going to be a quiet first half into at least the middle of July. And then we'll see if the area of rising air, which is really moving very slowly, makes it past Hawaii and eventually into Central America and the Atlantic Ocean. If it does happen, then perhaps towards the end of July, we'll start to see an uptick in activity. So let's show you the climatology when it comes to hurricane season. We are here at the very, very beginning. The peak of hurricane season is right around September 10th, and things really start to uptick here in the middle of August. So by the middle of August, that's when we should start to see a lot more activity. But obviously, if we get a storm or two out of this situation that we have going for the next week or so, either in the Western Gulf or the Southern Caribbean or whatever's behind that, then we'd be well above normal for this time of year at least. All right, so let's talk about the forecast from the national, from NOAA and also from CSU. We've mentioned this before, calling for close to 20 named storms this year. The average is 14, so obviously we're forecasting an above normal season and above normal in terms of hurricanes and also major hurricanes, as you can see. And the big kind of overarching reason for that is that we're still in a La Nina, but I will tell you that things are starting to warm up a little bit just below the surface in the Pacific. It's an indication that maybe La Nina is beginning to weaken now. I don't think we're going to transition to an El Nino. Maybe we'll transition to a neutral by the peak of season. We'll see what happens, but we're starting to see hints that it's starting to warm up a bit. Usually La Nina is associated with cool water over the tropical Pacific, less convection in the tropical Pacific Ocean, and thus lighter winds that then traverse into the Atlantic Ocean, and that allows these tropical systems to really fester and develop and get stronger. Also, generally speaking, you have to have rising air somewhere in the basins near the equator, in the tropics. It could be in the Pacific, could be in the Western Pacific, could be Eastern Pacific, could be in the Atlantic, but somewhere you're going to have a lot of rising air. And it's typically where the warmest water is relative to the other basins. In the subtropics here in the Atlantic, we have cool water. And in the Pacific Ocean, we have cool water. So where is the place adjacent to these areas where we have warm water? Unfortunately for us, it happens to be in the Atlantic, the Caribbean, and also in the Gulf of Mexico. So this is the area that is favored this year for the likely above normal season, and that's why we're so concerned about what's going to be happening over the next couple to few months. All right, let's bring the gang back in and chat about what's going on now and what we expect to happen.
Let's begin our Meteorologist Q&A powered by Handyman Roofing. You know how it works. Use a hashtag in our comment section. You can ask a question with that hashtag, and then we can feature you on screen just like this. And why don't we begin with a comment from the KAMR Facebook page and send it right over to John Lynn Garrett asking hashtag Hey John, how much do we have so far this year? And I think that what they were talking about, what Lynn was talking about, she asked this question as you guys were talking about rainfall in Amarillo, Texas. So let's bring in John to take this question from Lynn.
Well, thank you very much. And we haven't had much rain this year. Thus far, from January 1 up through present day in Amarillo, about 3¼ inches of rain, and we should be around 10 inches of rain. So we are really lagging behind, which goes back to what Jeff was saying. Basically, this ridge of high pressure over the top of us, this La Nina, continues to thwart our chances for getting moisture across the panhandles. We are seeing it in some areas, but we're not seeing the blanket coverage like we can see during the months of June, July, and August.
Let's bring Jeff back in because, Jeff, I know you wanted to continue talking a little bit about Amarillo, Texas.
Yeah, you know, I just have so much interest in this topic. First of all, would you like to buy some rain, John? I'll sell it to you. We got a lot of it here in Florida. Make some money off of this exchange.
If the price is right, yes.
Wow. Oh, yeah, we can make some money. So La Nina. So we've had an unfortunate sequence of La Ninas over the past 20 years or so. It's really drying out the West, or at least that's part of the reason here. And I've been reading that there is a thought, at least, and this is just preliminary now, that climate change, warming of the global climate, may end up causing more of these La Ninas. Now, one thing I will say, and I have a specialty in climate, is that the one thing that seems most confusing about what climate change may or may not do in the future is how it's going to affect El Ninos and La Ninas. But there's at least been a little research kind of leaning towards more of a La Nina state. In fact, a paper came out within the last 2 or 3 weeks or so. The papers on the drought out west, as you probably know, have said that, you know, a lot of what we've seen over the past 20 years, this horrible drought that we're in, a lot of it's due to this unfortunate incidence of La Nina after La Nina, but also some of it's due to climate change and the warming of the climate, more evaporation, and thus less moisture in the soil. So can you speak to that? Because I really think that this is a really big deal what's going on out west right now.
Well, for us, it seems like we have had more La Ninas than El Ninos across the southwest part of the United States. And when you think about the state of Texas, you talk about you're a climate expert. Up here, we are in a steppe climate, but you go to the 100-degree meridian, which divides us with western Oklahoma, and the rest of the state is a subtropical humid climate. But that's the difference. We're at 3,600 feet above sea level. For us, a La Nina is not good news. It basically means that we're going to have high pressure that just sets up over the top of the southwest part of the United States, and we get that sinking air, the compressional warming. And so instead of having convection or the thunderstorms developing like we typically see this time of year, it's day after day after day of just seeing basically not much. The winds blow, the dirt blows, wildfires are rampant for us during the fall and winter months. Once we get into, below freezing, the grass is cured. So we may have had enough rain during the summer to give us some pretty good vegetation, but then we just go dry in the late fall and winter. And here comes our wildfire threat. The same for our neighbors in New Mexico. Our viewing area is actually the size of Ohio. So when I am broadcasting to my viewers, I'm broadcasting to the Texas Panhandle, the Oklahoma Panhandle, Southwest Kansas, Eastern New Mexico, and far Western Oklahoma. And for all of us, it's the same story. Now, how much does climate change have to do with this? Well, only time will tell for sure. But with the fact that we seem to be seeing more La Ninas here in the southwestern part of the United States, as opposed to the El Ninos coming in every 5 to 6 to 7 years, or maybe 4 years, we are not able to even catch up on annual rainfall. I mean, it's just compounding itself like we were saying a while ago. And again, we are a big agricultural place out here. We have a lot of producers. We have a lot of ranchers. They depend on the water for their livelihood, of course. And, you hate to be so grim about it, but we just don't really see anything on the horizon that's going to change this anytime soon.
Let's get to this question coming in from Dominic, #HeyJB from the WPRI Facebook page. That's up in Providence, Rhode Island. What's the likelihood any of these systems are strengthened to, or forecast to strengthen into a tropical storm? Let's bring in, tracking the tropics, WFLA Max Defender 8 meteorologist Rebecca Barry to take this one from Dominic.
And so I don't think that we're going to see that secondary system that we're looking at on the screen right now. I don't think we're going to see that develop. The forecast models continue to show it struggling with shear, struggling with some of the other environmental factors. I do think what we've been tracking is potential tropical cyclone 2. I do think we're eventually going to see that become Bonnie. I think it'll be a weak tropical storm. I think it'll be a rainmaker for Nicaragua and Costa Rica, but not going to affect the U.S. at this point with this track. The area near Houston, it's unlikely that it would become a tropical storm, but the longer it swirls out there, of course, the more things could change. But right now, not really looking for that to develop either, despite the fact that there's a medium chance on it, a 40% chance for it to develop. That's that other system we're looking at right there. The good news is if it does develop, it is pretty close to the coastline, so we wouldn't necessarily see it becoming more of a wind event. This is a rainmaker for Texas, and as we just heard, they could actually use some of that rain.
We can only hope that Texas gets the rain that it so desperately is seeking. Jeff, I'll pose this to you. Are you surprised that at this stage with where we are with this system that we're not talking about Tropical Storm Bonnie yet? I mean, listen, it could be coming out in 10 minutes from now with a special advisory. At any moment, they could upgrade it. But here we are. We're still talking about potential Tropical Cyclone 2, which is a mouthful to say, of course.
I can't say I'm surprised at all. I mean, this is really far south. It's really early in the season. It has climatology working against it. It is so rare that you get systems that come from here during the end of June that actually are able to form. If they form, it would be easier for them to form if they can gain some latitude. This hasn't gained any latitude, and now it's entraining some air off of South America as well. So it just has a lot of factors working against it. I do think it's going to form. Notice how, though, the National Hurricane Center is not really forming it until it gets a little closer to the open water here in the Western Caribbean. So none of this surprises me. Again, shouldn't be doing this time of year anyway, but it certainly had a lot of environmental factors working for it. If it had been able to get another couple degrees of latitude further north, I think it would have formed already. And then there's some other things we talked about, which is just strong trade winds pushing it along a little too fast, and you end up with essentially a low-level center and the mid-level center kind of not right on top of each other, not stacked as we call it in meteorology, and so it's harder for these things to really get going.
Let's get this comment in. We'll send this one over to Rebecca, and I think we can fairly say that if Rebecca or Jeff or John could answer this question, we would be would be talking about this from our yachts and not from a studio. Samuel Lewis Reed, hashtag HeyJB, what are the chances of Tampa or Central Florida getting hit this year by a storm? Rebecca, it's all yours.
Once again, the science isn't quite there for us to be able to predict this is where the storms are headed. In fact, the science isn't even as advanced as we'd like it to be for the number of systems that we expect in the entire Atlantic, much less where those are going to end up. But typically, we at least get scraped by a system at least once a season where we're a little worried about it, whether most of them are weak tropical storms or we're just far enough away from them that we're not looking at a direct impact. And so that's most likely what we're going to deal with. But whether 15 storms form or 150 storms form, all that matters.
Oh.
All that matters is if a strong one ends up at or near you, and that makes it a bad season for you. So we always try to focus on the overall. We will most likely deal with a tropical system at some point, whether it's a near miss or just a weaker system, but we always have to be prepared for that stronger system.
Let's bring in Jeff and John. Yeah, when it comes to long range forecasting, I mean like months out, it's a very difficult thing to do.
For sure.
Indeed
yeah.
it is.
Yeah. I think John would agree with me, though, that, our meteorological and climatological community have gotten a lot better at forecasting seasonally. I just showed you the Madden-Julian oscillation, which kind of helps us to forecast a couple to a few weeks out. And then, of course, I showed you El Nino and La Nina, which we can use to forecast, a few months out. And, so we can give you a general idea, but we can't tell you exactly when these systems are going to hit any one place, unfortunately, or I'm sure that John or I would be retired right now if we could. We'd be gajillionaires.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And again, for our part of Texas up here, when we look at a 3-month outlook, so to speak, the range looking 3 months out, we're just not seeing much change. We still have this La Nina that's in play for us, which means basically there's a chance for thunderstorm from time to time, but we're just not seeing the amount of rain that we typically get this time of year into the latter part of summer and early fall. It's just not happening. So for us and for our friends in New Mexico, Colorado, Arizona, and of course, Oklahoma, we're still in varying degrees of drought because of this. And I hate to paint such a grim picture on it for our part of the world up here, but we just need the rain for sure. And we're just not seeing it yet.
And obviously, you have a lot more people that are moving out to the west. Right. You have water wars going on. There's a lot of, the legalities behind who owns and who has rights to the water, John, you know better than I do, are complicated and not necessarily, I would say, fitting the day, fitting the moment, if you will. I don't want to go much further than that because there are a lot of people who own water who don't want to give their rights up and stuff like that, right. And I can understand that. So it's really complicated. It's really complicated stuff, and it just seems like the West is digging itself further and further into drought. More and more people are out there. Hopefully we will get a break here sometime soon. Get into
years back we used to have a resident in the Texas Panhandle. He's passed away now. His name was T. Boone Pickens, and he was his thoughts were to drill water from his land and from the Northeast Texas Panhandle and ship that water downstate to our large cities, Houston, San Antonio, Austin, Dallas, Fort Worth area. And that did not take hold. But that was one of the thought processes going on at that time with this billionaire that lived up here in the northeast part of the Texas Panhandle. For us, we use a combination of lake water and well water that feeds the masses, so to speak. And so we are doing okay. Our reservoirs are above where they were back in 2011. That was a drought-ridden year by a La Nina to end all years, at least as far as normal times or present-day times are concerned. But again, up here, we're just needing some of the moisture. And like we were saying earlier, for us, tropical storms that hit the Gulf Coast of Texas typically do not come into the Texas Panhandle. If anything, as they make their way inland, because of the venting process upstairs in the top part of the cyclone, as it spreads out away from the cyclone, gravity pulls it to the ground and we get that compression warming, and it just gets hot up here. We just don't see any benefit from it at all. So for us, we need that tropical storm to come up through the Baja of California, being trained into the westerlies, be pulled over the mountains into the Texas Panhandle, into our viewing area, to at least give us a chance for rain. That's kind of the way it plays here. Every once in a while, we'll have a land-based tropical storm or system coming in from the Gulf that will help us out, the Gulf of Mexico, but usually they track way off to the northeast of us.
I don't know if you've had a chance to look at the progression of this system once it gets in the Pacific. Any chance this is going to make the right turn and head towards the Baja?
You know, I hate to say, I'm not sure that it's going to. It may be making its way more out into the, out into the Pacific and just dissipate. Like Cecilia, or was it Celia, and also Blas? I believe both of those did that same thing. So I'm not sure it's going to be pulled over us yet, but I will say this, we do have a fairly substantial monsoon occurring out in New Mexico. And remember, monsoonal flow is just a reversal of the wind is what that is. So it may help to pull some of the moisture from this system when it gets into the Pacific up our way. Only time will tell.
As we talk about how difficult it is to predict what a system in front of us is going to do, we were just talking about long range forecasting. I've got some unique, of course, I got some great followers on the WFLA JB Facebook page. We've got Kate commenting this, #HeyJB. I have a baby due in September. I'm going to need you to control the weather and keep those hurricanes under control. First and foremost, congratulations to Kate. If we could control the weather just for that baby being delivered, believe me, we absolutely would. Let's get to one from the WFLA Rebecca Facebook page as we end out this edition of Tracking the Tropics. Delaney Norman asking, #HeyRebecca, what about going to the Carolinas? The Carolinas right now, a great time of year to visit the Carolinas, Rebecca.
It is a great time of the year to visit the Carolinas. This is not typically when we see those systems heading towards the Carolinas. It has to do with the high pressure that's generally over Bermuda. We call it the Bermuda High. As it shifts further north, the air that goes clockwise around that high pressure system, this time of the year, it slings the system into the Gulf. And like we're seeing, this one's a little further south than usual. But as that high pressure system drifts northward, that's when we see that sweet spot where the east coast of Florida may be hit in the middle of that transition. And by the end of that transition, it's slinging those storms closer to the Carolinas. That's when we see the Outer Banks getting hit a little bit later on in the season. So everything looks pretty good for the Carolinas right now.
I would like to make a visit. It'd be great to go check out, Myrtle Beach, or go check out Raleigh. One of the great places, one of the great destinations there in the Carolinas. Another great destination, Texas. I need to get over to Texas, and I need to, maybe take in a Cowboys game, John. I don't know who your football team is, but the last word on this edition of Tracking the Tropics, it's all yours, sir.
It definitely is the Dallas Cowboys. I actually grew up in Oklahoma, and believe it or not, the Okies, the Oklahomans, really love to watch the Dallas Cowboys play. That's back in the 70s and 80s when they were winning all the time. This day and age, well, we hope to get them on the right track this year.
And what are you going to be watching, before we let you go, what are you going to be watching over the course of the next several months as we continue to progress through the 2022 Atlantic hurricane season?
Well, for us, basically, it's the same story. We'll be watching it move into the Gulf. I know it becomes more active. And like Jeff was saying, a lot of things have to come into play. I actually have family that lives down around Houston and Austin in that area. So even though I may not be forecasting bad weather for us, meaning rain and hurricane force winds and tropical storm rain and whatnot, I do actually forecast for my family downstate. And I think I'm on their speed dial or something.
John Harris, the chief meteorologist at our Nexstar sister station, KAMR, in Amarillo, Texas. John, we appreciate your time. Great to pick your brain a little bit. And of course, as we continue to learn so much about tropical development from our Tracking the Tropics meteorologists here at WFLA, the Max Defender 8 weather team, Chief Meteorologist Jeff Baradelli and Meteorologist Rebecca Barry. Of course, Tracking the Tropics is live Wednesdays, 2 o'clock Eastern, 1 o'clock Central, over the course of hurricane season. If there's tropical development that we feel like you need to know about, we of course have additional episodes over the course of the week. Whatever website, app, or social media platform that you're watching on right now, that's where we live, that's where we'll be, keeping an eye on the systems that form in the Atlantic as far as the hurricane season. For John, Rebecca, and Jeff, I'm JB. So long, folks. We'll see you next time on Tracking the Tropics, powered by Handyman Roofing.
Thank you for watching Tracking the Tropics.